Hi, hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT Show. I'm John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. You know, we're trying something different tonight. We're coming up for very close to 100 shows, and we decided we're going to upgrade our technology. So we're not using Zoom tonight, we're using a process called StreamYard, and it has lots of possibilities. But I hope you'll bear with us if we have, maybe along the way, who knows, maybe a few teething problems. Also, tonight, as we all know, the weather is absolutely dreadful. And we could have power cuts at any time, or we could have internet dropping out. I do hope you'll bear with us. And I hope you're not too badly affected as well. Well, thanks to you. As I said, we're coming up for 100 shows. A lot of that's down to the Indie Live team, and they're growing the whole offerings on Indie Live almost on a weekly basis. Do look out, go to indielive.net for more details. You'll see all of that stuff there. But again, as I say most weeks, do support the crowdfunder. The folks behind the scenes who make this happen, they have lives to live, they have expenses. It's awfully important that you back them. And they look to you for support. They're not sitting on a cash mountain of 30 million like the BBC, who can afford to return or send a whole chunk of that to London to make shows that have little or no Scottish content. This is full Scottish content. Everything you want to know about Scotland is on the TNT Show and Indie Live. You know, it's been another great day for British democracy. And I want to begin with a question, if I may, and it's this. Who said this a few days ago? We won't accept a world in which a powerful neighbour can bully their neighbours. We won't accept it because we believe all people, no matter where they were born, have the right to live safely, choose who governs them, and to decide what organisations they aspire to be members of, or indeed what bodies they want to cease to be members of. And we will not compromise on that principle. Well, that wasn't me who said that. That was Boris Johnson. So Boris Johnson clearly believes in the sovereignty of nations and the possibility that nations can decide for themselves. There we are, full of interesting contradictions, Boris Johnson. Or maybe he was just telling a whopper. Who knows? Thanks for joining us this evening. Tonight we're talking to Wendy Barrie, and Wendy hosts the Scottish Food Show on Indie Live. You really ought to take that in. I mean, this is fantastic stuff. She will surprise you with details of the Scottish food that you never knew about. So we've got loads to talk about. And Wendy's here for a full hour. And she's taking your questions live. So there's plenty of time for your questions to be considered. All the details are at Indie Live if you want to submit a question. So the nation talks. And in many respects, as I always say, this is your show. We're live and we're free. So no license, no problem. Now to our guest tonight. The Nation talks to Wendy Barrie. Thanks so much for joining us, Wendy. How are you?
My pleasure. I'm fine, thank you. I'm snug and warm, but there's a wild and wind hoolie outside.
And where are you, safe and warm tonight?
In Aberdeen, in Fife.
Oh, Aberdeen, lovely. Silver Sands?
That's right, absolutely. Yeah, the Silver Sands.
A big favourite. I used to take the grandchildren there. They just loved it.
Oh, it's lovely. And there's the Black Sands as well. There's the two beaches. It's
quite yes. So, your primary interest, we'll get to talking about Bussy and many other interesting things later, but let's focus initially on why you are so committed and interested in Scottish food.
Well, I'm a cook and a food writer. I went to catering college, so I've kind of got food and granny's cooking, Dundee granny's cooking in my DNA. But when I went to catering college and from then on, what's really captured me is the fact that behind all these wonderful Scottish foods and Scottish produce and Scottish growers are people and families. And so it's not only the produce and the delicious foods, but the people that have worked so hard to bring them to the table. And so when I work, and indeed in my spare time as well, the whole thing kind of, intermingles. It's about the local produce and the people behind it. And if you're looking for local produce and supporting them, then you're cutting out all these big guys and you're cutting out this long food chain. You're probably cutting out air miles as well. So, behind every good food, there's good people and families that are producing it for us. So that's a big part of what I do.
Yeah. And how are you finding hosting the Scottish Food Show?
Oh, I love it. I love it. That started because I was doing a little gig on Food Sovereignty Day. And one of you guys had heard it and said, actually, you'd quite like that. Would you like to do a monthly program? And I really enjoy it because I love a platform to get on my soapbox, clamber up and, bombard you all with more Scottish produce because there's so much stuff that I think people aren't aware of. They think about the whiskey and they think about the shortbread and they maybe think about the salmon, but actually there's so many hundreds of thousands of different food and different regions creating different foods. There's an endless supply to talk about. So I just love a chance to get on the soapbox.
Well,
And that's
great.
what my Scottish Food Guide's all about as well.
Great. Well, there you are, folks. Head for the Scottish Food Show on Indie Live. You'll be hugely impressed. We've had a couple of questions. Question number one is, and I think you've actually solved this. Can Wendy solve the question? I was going to say the burning question, but that's too loaded. Should you toast both sides of the bread for toast and cheese?
I do, and he's some cheeky guy asking about cheese on toast, but there's nothing wrong with cheese on toast, so long as you're using a good local Scottish cheese.
Okay. Well, here's another one. Don Mann is asking, what spices should I put in my haggis?
Ah, that's an interesting one because really it's your haggis and you can do what you like. But the whole kind of history of the haggis is I wish I had my burn supper notes in front of me now. You'd get haggis speech, but the whole point was that it was something that you had to deal with the offal fast because it would deteriorate first. So the good old laird would probably get all the nice cuts, but actually the guys that had the sheep, or indeed had the cow, it wouldn't necessarily always be a sheep. It would depend on what you had. Would be able to eat the offal, and you had to cook it and semi-preserve it fast. And so to boil it in the stomach bag with what spices you had to hand and oatmeal would work beautifully and give you a great nutritious meal. So we had things like wild caraway, we had horseradish. This is Scotland I'm talking about. So we would use what we had. And then later on, when there was more spice trading, there would be a little bit more of other elements coming as well. But really, it is entirely up to you. Nice and peppery, I like my haggis.
Well, that's the way I prefer it too. Jock Gibson is asking, how does Wendy see the subsidies for Scottish farming continue? I mean, where will the money come from?
Ah, good evening, Jock. Jock probably knows more about this than me. When it comes to financials, I'm better at weighing my ingredients out. Nevertheless, I have huge admiration for Jock, if it is the Jock I know. I think that we have to take the brave step and run ourselves. I don't like being run from somewhere down in Westminster, miles and miles away. We have to have the faith that we can do this. We have a fantastic country with a fantastic natural wealth. And if it's the Jock, I think it is, he's got the most amazing Highland beasts and sheep and such high quality beef that we really want to be singing the praises about our produce, and not opening this door to free trade with food, with all these imports. Free trade and food don't go together, in my opinion. So I'm slightly branching off from the subsidies question because it's not my strong point. But I think free trade is a crippler for our food. And I am sure that, the government at the moment, the Scottish government, are finding funds for regional food networks and things. I'm sure when the time comes, they will have to do it because it is part of our food sovereignty. And we have to support the farmers. We really must.
What do you mean when you say food sovereignty?
I mean that people do not appreciate what we have. We have an incredible range of species, varietals, breeds that are part of our nation. Without crossbreeding them, without developing them into something that has got a narrower gene pool or a more limited use within different variations of climate. Having that sovereignty of our food gives us a resilience, which we need for our economy and we need for the climate variabilities.
Yeah, we were talking earlier off air, and you mentioned that I think there's only two specific. I'm going to use the word breeds. I'm probably using the wrong word here, but species of Aberdeen Angus left. I think you said there's only two left because some time ago Aberdeen Anguses were exported to the US, and there was a number of changes there to the gene pool, and then they came back. So what we're seeing is those in the main Aberdeen Anguses that came back. Is that right?
Yeah, the Aberdeen Angus is a fascinating example, which will have half the Aberdeen Angus owners, in fact, probably 85% hating me. But nevertheless, it is a classic example, which has happened with a lot of different breeds. But the Aberdeen Angus you see on menus everywhere. And in Scotland, there are two families that have got the old genetics through and through. And some other farms have bought some of their genetics and some straws and some DNA, but the two that are actually supporting the small native breed Aberdeen Angus through and through are the Tukes at Hardy's Mill and the Souters up in Forfar at Dunluise. And really, for the Aberdeen Angus Society, you can be sired. You have to be sired by an Aberdeen Angus, but that's all. And if you're in America, to be Angus, it only has to be a black cow or a black bull. But so they've done a lot of developing in America, and these genes have come back. And so when you look at black cows in the field, very few are sort of my shoulder or waist height. Most of them are rather large Ernies, as I call them. So they're still registered Aberdeen Angus, but these old bloodlines are rare. So the native bred Aberdeen Angus is down to two families keeping that going. And it's not just that, it's things like the same with the Highlanders, because if you have pasture fed like Jock, then they're living off the land. They're doing no harm to the environment. They're doing no harm to the climate. They're not knocking down any forests. They're not eating any grain. They're eating grass that we can't eat. But when you develop the breed and make them big and muscly, then they need grain. And within 48 hours of giving them grain, you've changed the flavour of the beef. Interesting.
Because I remember when I lived in the States, that was one of the elements that was used in marketing to commend steaks. I'm now non-carnivorous, but way back then, many years ago, decades ago, I used to eat beef, and there's lots of beef in American restaurants. And it was always advertised, or mostly, as grain-fed. This was a big deal. You wouldn't want to buy anything that wasn't grain-fed. And now you're saying, well, actually, no, that's not smart. Yeah.
Not smart, and not good for your health either. The grass-fed have better CLAs and omegas than the grain-fed, so they're better for you. Yeah.
And did I catch you right there when you said that the original stock, Aberdeen Angus stock, is not a large animal? Did you say it was shoulder high or waist high?
Yeah. It's not a large animal. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the same for a lot of the landrace and the heritage breeds, that they were smaller and they were growing slower, with a much more developed flavour. So slower growing, which we also do well in our northern climes with grass, gives you a far better flavour. But when it comes to the abattoirs and the systems in place for valuing animals, particularly, then farm animals, then they do it by the kilo and not by the flavour. So these things all work against the heritage breeds, but there's quite a resurgence. There is a real interest in resurgence, which is fantastic. There's actually a thing in Scotland called the Slow Food Arc of Taste. It's a voluntary post, and I I do that. So I research all these different animals that we have in Scotland, and find out a bit more about them and why they're rare and how we should support them. And they are easy to find, and a lot of them. I mean, some are very rare, obviously, but some of them, like a lovely Highland beef and Highland steak, Highland mince, you can get mail order. So it doesn't necessarily affect it if you don't have a butcher near you.
Oh, interesting.
There's questions coming in, but I can't keep up. I'm too busy enjoying myself.
Don't
Somebody
worry
else.
about that. Don't worry about that. The question that Charles Smith is asking is, if required, could Scotland be self-sufficient without
Oh my
food,
goodness.
without imports?
That is so an easy gig. There is absolutely no question whatsoever that we are totally self-sufficient, and that's where the food security comes in. I absolutely 100%. We have everything we need. We can even supply you with some wonderful Wirsch sour gooseberries, which is the Nordic lemon. So much as I enjoy some Mediterranean food, we could nail the whole thing for you. I promise.
Really?
Yes. In quantity and quality.
Now, how many people do you think know that?
I don't think they listen. I think, I don't know. I think sometimes, you get your hands on a supermarket barrow and you go into some kind of different mode. But we've got such great produce all year round. You have to be a bit clever in the winter months, but it's not that we can't get it, and we can also make the most of things that we've preserved. I mean, that's what our forefathers did, and we're very lucky. We have an opportunity to use the produce. And I mean, we haven't really touched on food poverty at all when we were chatting earlier, but I mean, that's a huge problem in Scotland.
Let's
But
talk about it now.
that
Let's
also
talk about it now.
very addressed. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one way of tackling it is to really improve the quality of the school meals, which is something which I burn for, and which I sit on the standard setting for the Food for Life as a voluntary post, to get more unprocessed foods into schools. And I think that's a very good way of starting, because that covers every community. From poorer areas right through, everybody you can get a good breakfast at school, get a good lunch at school. That's something that we could really nail across the whole of Scotland. And some regions are doing that really well. And I'm trying to get Fife on board, and they're still dragging their feet. But we'll nail it. We'll nail it one way or another. So, but I think, there is this. Bussa, my husband, was telling me that his granny was a great cook, and she did nose to tail pig. She made her own bread all the time. But when visitors came, she bought cakes, because she had this thing of, showing that I can afford to buy cakes. So they were rubbish. Her own ones were much better. But there's this same kind of psyche, I think, sometimes in the Scots psyche, that, I need to buy this, or I need to buy this, or this processed one's better than something I could make myself. And actually, with the right knowledge in schools, we can make tremendous meals with cheap ingredients when they're in season. And we eat extremely well in this house, I would have to say. But I eat in season. And if you're buying things in season, it can cost small money. So it's very doable. So I think we don't always ask the right question with food poverty. I did a radio show. A family had won a fitted kitchen on a radio show. And I was asked to go along and cook a big breakfast, fry up the whole works for them. The radio presenter was there, told me at 9 o'clock at night, and this was for a breakfast radio at sort of 6 in the morning, told me at 9 o'clock at night, when we should have all been in bed, that he was actually vegan and did I have a vegan breakfast up my sleeve as well. But that's another story. So everybody was in this flat on about the 20th floor in Glasgow. Everybody, their cousins, their friends, their dog, and I was doing big breakfast. But I never go anywhere without my own pans and everything, just in case of. So the car was packed, and boy did I need it, because that family had a lovely fitted kitchen and not a pan in the place. They hadn't used their kitchen, they hadn't unwrapped the oven because they didn't possess a pan. So it's not just about telling people you can make a good soup because it's inexpensive. There's an education journey and a kitchen kit required.
Yeah. You said that you were hoping that Fife would come on board.
Yes.
So who's doing it well, would you say?
Well, East Ayrshire was the first, and they're an absolute trailblazer. And I worked with Robin Gourley back on that in the day. And they are by far the best and have been doing it for over a decade now. But I think Orkney Council's on board. I think some of the Highlands now. I would need the list, but if you go onto the Food for Life website, you'll see which regions are and which regions aren't. And there's about half are and half aren't. And I think the ones that aren't are just dragging their feet a bit because they think it's difficult and it's expensive. But I think you just have to kind of change hearts and minds and convince them. Because East Ayrshire proved that it was not any more expensive because they don't really have a bigger budget. But just connecting with local producers. We got a local cheese, local milk, local potatoes, and just from there, you know.
Yeah. You drew almost a direct line earlier between food sovereignty, the sort of slow growing aspect of producing food, and climate change. Mm-hmm. Could you develop that a little bit?
Yes, I get a bit incensed because the cows always get the blame. And it's so grossly unfair because it's about industrialized food production and sensible traditional food production. That is where I think the real problem lies. So whether it be feeding grain to cattle, which is a no-no, it doesn't help the climate, it doesn't help the forestation, and it doesn't help the end product. It diminishes the quality of the end product. So from that point of view, if it's grass-fed, it is not a problem at all. It's the grain-fed. And likewise, it is the money driving the vegetarian and the vegan options that are high-tech. I go by the adage, would your granny understand the names on the back of the packet? And if it says, wheat, flour, sugar, salt, then we're on a good winner. And if they're all chemicals, then really? And if we're going to have peak oil, if we're going to have less energy, then the amount of energy going into factories producing highly processed foods, which are questionable for our diet, is not helping the climate. I'm all for vegetarian. We like vegetarian. We have vegetarian restaurants we go to. It's not a problem. But I admire the ones that do something creative with a cabbage, not the ones that buy some highly processed sludge that's called a burger. If they want a burger, boil the beans, make the burger, add the vegetable, create your own rather than the ultra processed. And these ultra processed foods worry me also, that we're creating a cocktail for our bodies because, you can say, well, this is safe and that is safe. But actually, when you put it all together, another of my pet hates is artificial sweeteners. Because this sugar tax business is one way of saying, oh, we're sorting out the sugar in the Scottish diet because we're reducing sugar. But you're not making it less sweet. You're just adding sweetener. And there's a lot of evidence and research to show that there's carcinogenic attributes to some of these. And again, the cocktail, if you're having the artificial sweetener and the other things you're having in the ultra processed foods, that is a big worry because we don't know quite what health time bomb we're creating there.
And I'd be interested what your views are on the role of the supermarkets in all of this. Because it seems to me, I mean, based on my experience, the bulk of people buy their food at supermarkets, don't they?
You are absolutely right, and I absolutely hate supermarkets. You said to me earlier, you very kindly said to me earlier, now I'm outing you, but you said, is there any topic that's a no-no? And I said to my husband, I said, no topic is a no-no. If I can't answer, I'll say I can't answer. And my husband said, what about supermarkets? I said, that's okay, you can ask me and I'll tell him.
Well, tell us.
So I dislike the whole ethos of supermarkets because the shareholders and the dividends are the winners, not the farmers, not the producers. They're way down the line. The amount of markup that goes on in the packaging, the marketing, the transport, the oil, can I go on? You know, it is not a good sustainable model. The food system we have is not ideal, but you know, we have to also work with what we've got, and all because I don't like them, it might be all that somebody has near them. But there are alternatives, and we don't have to. We can vote with our feet, and we can try and modify our behavior. Personally, I try not to go into the supermarket at all, but I understand that that's not always possible for either myself or other people. So you know, look at the labels and buy Scottish, because there are Scottish things in there, and turn away from the stuff that is not Scottish. Turn away from the stuff that is not in season and then has blatantly come on a plane. And in Sweden, my husband's Swedish, so I think we're coming on to that later. But in Sweden, they've got a thing called Reko. Now, in Scotland, the equivalent is called neighbour food. And what you do is you go onto a website. I'm not on commission. You can go onto Scottish Food Guide as well, but this is just quite interesting. You can go onto their website, you can order and pay for what you want and go to a local hub, which might be you know, a cycle ride away, it might be a short car drive away, it might be very handy depending on where you are, can be a car park somewhere, or it can be, you know, there's one in Fife at Falkland, there's one in Perthshire at Meginch, a place where the producers all go and you just do a handover. You've ordered it and you get it handed. So you see the producer, you know it's going straight in their pocket, and the website people take a commission. Now it's a thing called neighbour food. It's nothing to do with my Scottish Food Guide. I take no commissions, but this is a sort of collaboration to get people all meeting at one car park. And it's taken off in Scotland. But the reason I mention it is because in Sweden, the number of people using Reko has almost hit 1 million, 10% of the population, which is pretty impressive.
And in Scotland, if people tonight want to use neighbour food, that's the name of the website, is it?
Yeah, that's the name. And
www.neighbourfood.
I'm not exactly sure of where the dots come, but if you Google neighbour food and put in your region, you'll find something. Yeah. And if you can't find it, please email me because I'll find it for you.
Yeah. I think these are wise words also from the perspective of the model that's used in supermarkets. It seemed to me it was sort of developed from the States. It was created around a model of we can pile them high and sell them cheap, you know. The classic Tesco approach to the market. But it seems to me that only works if you can buy very cheaply and then persuade people to go along to a big building and line up with other people, and they go and help themselves, and they take the stuff to a checkout. You can tell it's not working. Here's a couple of indicators why I think it's not working. One is they're getting rid of staff. Increasingly, you don't go to a checkout and talk to somebody. What happens is you go to a checkout and there's a coding system, and you put your product through the coding system and it tells you how much. And then invariably, if you're anything like my local Sainsbury's, the system will fail because the software is crap. That's a technical term, I suspect. And they have to go off. And so therefore, somebody is always going to have to be employed, but not to actually interact with the customer, except to say, I'm sorry, the software has failed again. Let me reset it so that you can get what you want. You know, I mean, it's just, it seems to me if you go down that route, effectively what you're saying is we have to reduce our costs.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we're going to reduce our costs is take the bodies out, take the jobs away. That's not a good business model, in my humble opinion, because it strikes me that once you've taken the people out, you're then looking to somewhere else to make money, to shave a few pennies and to protect your margin. And then, of course, what completely changed the market in the UK was the German supermarkets opening up.
Yes.
And you must remember the days when all of the big 4 or 5 poo-hooed the whole idea of Aldi and Lidl and said, oh, they're all just a bunch of interlopers and they're no damn good and they won't last any more than 6 months. And now what I see when I switch on TV, it's got somebody from Tesco saying, look, this is what you can buy in Tesco and this is what you can buy in Lidl. I think, hey, they won. You lost, guys.
I challenge you, and I haven't done this personally, but I'm not a betting person, but I would put money on this. I challenge you to find a biscuit in one of these places that doesn't have palm oil.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they're being very cutthroat to the farmers. There's a lot of the farm shops in Scotland that have had bad experiences with supermarkets, and that's why they're now going it alone. And they're always trying to cut the price. And the products, when they're poor, are not dietarily efficient for us. So, you know, back to, you know, if you can find a little bit of time, it does take a bit of time, but a little bit of time, you can knock them up pretty quickly once you get the hang of it. You know, make the biscuits and use butter, and it's cheaper and it's more fun and it's better quality, you know. So they're making cheap products, and we are what we eat. And when you look at the back of these labels, there's so much that has got preservatives and additives to create a longer shelf life.
Yeah. You talked about Sweden earlier. Tell us more about Sweden. Tell us about Busse and tell us more about Sweden.
Okay, well, I caused havoc in a Swedish farmer's life. He was the guest speaker at a big food congress in Italy, and he was there speaking about his rare breed pigs, and I was there speaking about food tourism in Scotland. And the rest is history. And but he's no longer farming. He farmed up until 2013. So we had a bit of a, you know, to and fro going on there, even although we were married. And so now he's based in Fife as well, got his settled status, I might add. But we've kept a wee small holding in Sweden so that he can dig away in the soil and grow some vegetables. No animals, of course, because we're not there half the time. But nevertheless, it allows him to get his hands in the soil and feel that he's still got a little bit of Sweden there. It's a tiny small holding, a tiny wee cottage from the 1850s. It does have running water, which they don't all do, but it's from our own well. So it's I think the most modern bit of the kitchen is probably 1940. So it's lovely. It's low key. It's low tech, and we grow things. But of course, that's the kind of the background. But we also, of course, Busse has a huge network of farmer friends, and he's still very involved in the Nordic gene banks, back to these heritage animals and landrace varieties, as a volunteer. So they all do it in their own time. They're very passionate about the local breeds in Sweden and keeping them going in the same way in Scotland. And there's many similarities between that Nordic culture and here, and of course the weather, and indeed some of the native breeds. It's quite funny. Some of the books will say, "Oh, the Vikings brought them over to Scotland." Actually, some of them, it was the other way around. The Vikings took them back. so that's another bit of history busted. But we've got a great network of food producers and chefs that we network with in Sweden, because when Busse had his rare breeds, he was supplying local chefs as well. So it's fascinating. And of course, we're all Jock Tamson's bairns, but when you're over there, you get a chance to look and see what, you know, when you get a bit of distance, it makes you realise what's going on in Scotland, the opportunities, the challenges. And indeed, we have not got one. We have friends in. I don't know anyone in Finland, but certainly Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Not one of them can actually understand or comprehend why we're a colony. They just don't get it. Because in Scandinavia, they're all their own country, they've got their own autonomy, they make their own mind up, but nobody says that they're being nationalistic or they're being difficult. They're all neighborly. They all speak to each other. They have a Nordic alliance. So
Yeah.
it's not about not liking the one over the bridge. We're all in this together. They all network. They're all in businesses together, but they're still individual countries. So they just don't get it.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of that confusion is down to the media in Scotland, which is a bit of a mess. We've discussed that in previous programmes. I'll be dealing with it in my Sunday National column to some degree at the weekend. But I know what you've just said is echoed by hundreds of people that I've spoken to who are based outside Scotland. So many of them say, I find this deeply confusing. And some of the more assertive ones say, what the hell is wrong with you guys?
Yeah, I've had that as well.
What's wrong with you? I mean, surely you must see the idiocy that we see at Westminster, and yet you're put off by what? Pensions? What is that about pensions? I mean, this is a confected story. Surely it's obvious to anyone with half a brain that this has got up in order to weaken the whole, but they don't say that because they're anti-English or anti-Westminster.
No.
They're just pro-democracy.
Yeah.
A bit like, dare I say it, Boris Johnson, as I said at the beginning. Boris Johnson's he's very much in favour of democracy and small nations and not being bullied and all the rest of it. So, I mean, but you're right. People say, I lived for some time in Minnesota, which is full of Scandinavians.
Yes.
In the States. And so many of them loved their little cabins.
Yes.
Out in the wilds.
A little red one. We've got a little red one.
You've got a little red one. Is that the case in Sweden, that people like to have their small place that they can go to and spend time there? I mean, in the States, I was always intrigued by the ice fishing.
Yes.
Where people would actually drive out onto the Mississippi. And they had a big drill and they drilled a hole. And they had a cabin which they took off the back of the pickup truck and they stuck it over this hole. And they had little seats and a television. And they would sit around. Now, most of these were guys, I have to say. And they would sit around there with a whole load of booze and fish for days on end.
Well, I think, this is quite interesting in regard to COVID, the C word, because we were subjected to a lockdown and Sweden wasn't. And there's pros and cons. There's absolutely pros and cons. And I don't think any of us will know the sure answer for about a decade looking back and analysing. But what interested me was that, Lord love them. I'm Scottish through and through. I love Scots. I think they're brilliant. But quite a lot of Scots landed with Kentucky Fried Chicken wrappers by the hundreds in Aberdour when they were supposed to be at home. Whereas in Sweden, they were still chilling and going to their huts and doing their stuff. And we had to phone council 3 times, not just me, other people. Because we could hardly get out the door for the litter, So the Swedes are very outdoorsy and very leave nature with nothing but a footprint, and over 50%, I read, have access to a little cottage, but by far the vast majority of them are pretty primitive in a wonderful way. They don't want them to be all mod cons. That is the joy, that it's a simpler life, and you catch your fish or you have a barbecue with local produce, and it's not about spending money at all. The opposite, and a huge number of them don't have indoor plumbing. I mean, that's also part of the charm. Not part of the charm in my department. That was a deal breaker for us. But the simplicity is part of that genre and being outside. And so there's a lot of entertainment that costs zero, because being outside is fundamental to their psyche. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, and it could be that way in Scotland.
I did
Couldn't
notice
it?
somebody said the season for cod roe now. Get there now. I bought some the other day. It was delicious.
Well, there you are, Hashbury. You wanted to know what the season for when fishmongers are, and it's right now. So tomorrow morning, I suspect you need to rush to your local fishmonger and say, "I want all the fish roe that Wendy was telling me about last night." Tina Chalmers is asking, do you have recipes available for cheap, nutritious food?
I have recipes on my website, scottishfoodguide.scot, and all the recipes for the Scottish Food Show are on scottishfoodguide.scot.
Okay.
So there's recipes there. Some are using slightly more expensive produce, a lot are not, and it's all unprocessed. So I hope you enjoy them, and I hope you enjoy adapting them. And I think that's something that another thing about our food security in Scotland, and indeed the food we eat, because we used to eat a lot more liver and kidneys, a lot more haggis all the year round. There's an awful lot of cheap, really, really, really nutritious foods that we need to maybe get back in the habit of. And in your case, if you're not eating the liver and kidneys, there's lovely grains, and there's things like peas meal that's milled in Scotland. That give us protein, so we don't need to reach for the nearest deli counter hummus. There are alternatives that we can do ourselves.
That's
And of course,
interesting.
humble potato. We were talking earlier about the health of the countryside and the landscape, and even the vegetarians need animals, not if they don't choose to eat them, but as part of that valuable ecosystem. There's a lovely potato grower called Andrew Ski up at the back of Dundee, and he always has some cattle, because that's so important to have mixed farming, to have natural nutrition for the soil, because the soil health is so important, and we don't need to buy the artificial fertilizers if we're using nature and the animals grazing. So that's important as well.
I'll tell you, a big thing for me is cheese. I love cheese.
Oh, I love cheese.
What's your advice on Scottish cheese?
Eat it.
Look at my chins. I eat plenty of cheese.
Watch the program next Thursday, because the theme is cheese.
Okay.
And within my website, I have a Scottish cheese trail. And we have got some wonderful, wonderful cheeses in Scotland. And on my cheese trail, I also put down the breed of the animals and the kinds of cheese. And some of them have online shops. Some of them you can go and visit, and they have a cafe. So it's really lovely. And in fact, there are 2 or 3 different European camper van and motorcycle clubs that have actually used Scottish Cheese Trail for their holiday, and then come back and blogged about it, which I think is quite fun. So we've got some tremendous cheeses, and some of them are more expensive than your supermarket cheese. But for twice the price, you'll get 4 times the flavour.
Yeah.
And if you're going to take in the calories, enjoying some cheese, enjoy a good one. And you will actually eat half the cheese, because you'll get such a lovely, strong, rich flavour from it. If you eat a bland cheese, all you're doing is piling it on the hips.
So when you see cheeses in supermarkets labelled Cathedral City or some such thing, what sort of cheese is that?
Well, they are a block cheese. They're a big industrial kit that's produced them from milk from all over the place. A lot of the cows will have been bred entirely indoors, which is not good either. The colours, there is a natural annatto that gives you the red, but so a lot of these cheaper supermarket cheeses also have a little bit of starch. And you might have learned at school that cheese was 1/3 water, 1/5 protein, 1/3 fat. And nowhere in there did it say the word starch. And this is because when you create cheese, you make curds and whey, and the curds are the solid that give you your cheese, And the whey, well, they do different things with it. In Sweden, they boil it down to make a mesmer, which is like a sort of peanut butter color, but it's like a kind of caramel spread. It's beautiful. I make a sort of very simple cream cheese and use the whey in all my bread pizza doughs. So, and if you've got pigs, then all the whey would go to the pigs, which is why Parma ham was made with near the Parmesan cheese, because the whey went to the pigs. So, there was a synergy, there was a logic to the agriculture system. So, so the whey goes. So you don't get, from I nearly said a gallon, from from a litre of milk, you don't get the full quantity of cheese. And the cheaper the milk, the less cheese you get from it. So if you have a richer milk, you get more cheese for your buck from your milk. So of course, what do the big diet guys do? They add a little bit of starch. It's like you thickening your sauce with a spoonful of corn flour. Add a bit of starch, and you get more weight in your cheese for less milk. So it's legal, but that's not what cheese is meant to be. And if you try and freeze that cheese, it goes crumbly like that stuff when you're peeling wallpaper. Whereas if you have a really lovely, good bit of farmhouse, actually, your little bits of leftovers that you can use for something another day will freeze beautifully.
Yeah.
Quite
Now, I need to ask you this. I'm not the most observant shopper in the world when it comes to food or cheese, but I do like my cheese. My sense of it is that if I'm looking for a cheese that's relatively inexpensive, they're not necessarily Scottish cheeses. I have to look elsewhere. They're higher up, at a different shelf, and they always seem to be much more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because I'm not paying enough attention, or are they actually more expensive?
I'm probably fair to say that most of the Scottish cheeses are a slightly bigger price range than slightly more expensive than your supermarket blocks of orange. I mean, that's undeniable because you're comparing apples and pears. But I just would try and avoid shopping in a supermarket for cheese. Because, for example, I spoke to a lovely French chef, and it was either 2 Roquefort and 1 Camembert, or 2 Camembert and 1 Roquefort, that are actually made the traditional way in the entire of France. He knows who they are, but you're never going to get them at a supermarket. Same with the Italians. The best stuff they actually keep in Italy. So, the idea that you're getting a lovely, genuine French cheese when you go to a supermarket and buy it, you're getting a mass-produced one. For example, a brie, it'd be way, way better to go to Ballochmyle or Connaught in Scotland and buy a Scottish brie than one of the ones on offer from France, because you're not getting the real deal French ones. You're getting the industrial French ones.
So if somebody was to, like me, was to head out on the cheese trail, the Scottish cheese trail, where would that take me?
Well, it would take you from Orkney to Dumfries and Galloway. But if you're in the Central Belt, somebody like Craigie's Farm Shop at Queensferry has got probably about 20 of them in their fridge. So, and I've also put a retailer like that on the cheese trail so that you can, go to one place and get quite a lot of them. And indeed, particularly after COVID or during COVID, quite a number of the cheese makers have collaborated, so that if you're buying one, they quite often supply maybe a friend's cheese or a friend's chutney to go with it. So there's a bit of collaboration going on, which is also rather lovely. And thanks to COVID, there has been more interest in local produce. And one lovely lady in Ayrshire found families coming to her that had lived next to her for 20 years and had no idea she produced cheese. So, and I think a lot of those customers will stay, which is fantastic because we need that.
Yeah, it seems to me this is terribly important. So people can go to your website, they can watch the show. I assume that the shows that you've done in the past are available elsewhere. I think
you're all on the Indie Live, absolutely.
Yeah, so Kevin has put up the details there. You can go and look at these shows, folks. I strongly recommend that you do.
There's a fish one, a vegetarian one, a sort of festive celebration one, and the cheese one that's coming up next week.
Well, there you are, you see. So no excuses. Kev Riley is asking, basic foodstuffs cost what they do because politicians make the choice not to subsidize the producer. Is that your experience?
It's basic food sales cost. Um, we need to get a grip of what we pay for our food. We're getting some food way, way, way too cheap. And because we're short of money, we're thinking that needs subsidized because that's too expensive. We've kind of lost touch with what food costs. You know, to get a chicken for £2 or something is really not a chicken that you should be eating. Better to get something that is more nutritious.
Sorry, Wendy, why is that? Why shouldn't you eat a £2 chicken?
Because it's had a poor life. It's not able to support itself on its wee legs. It's not had a good diet. You know, the nutrition you get from a chicken is 50% of what the nutrition was in a chicken in the 1960s. They've changed the chicken. Now, meanwhile, on the Uist, on Orkney, on probably Fife as well, there are millions of greylag geese. So why not kill things? You know, we've got too many stags, they keep telling us, too many venison. Why not kill the things that we've got for free and get these things on the lunch tables, the supper menus, you know, instead of breeding these unhappy chickens. So we have a real broken food system, and we have food that gets wasted and food that arguably shouldn't be produced. It's that bad at that end.
Interesting. I was speaking to somebody who was in a Spanish restaurant, and he said that the owner made a huge big deal out of the fact that he had venison on the menu. This was a big, big deal. And he said, it's fresh. What, Spanish deer? Oh, no. We go for the Scottish. And I thought, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wayne is asking, did you know that you can make an old Scottish wine from whey?
That's right. And the Erringtons used to make it for wee whiles. They called it Fallachan. And they stopped making it. I tasted it. I liked it, but I don't think it was a massive seller. But yes, probably the Scots could distill anything to make booze from anything. In Sweden, it's the potatoes. Vodka from the potatoes.
Vodka, yeah. So what was it called? Frecken?
It was called Fallachan. Fallachan.
And this was made from whey.
Made from hay, yeah, from whey.
How do you make wine from? I mean, how does that happen?
Well, you'd need to ask the Erringtons, but there's sugar in whey, and it's the same sugar that the Swedes boil down to make this mesmer. So there is sugar in that whey, and so they must be using that to turn that into alcohol. And it's something that I think they still do in maybe Eastern Europe, and dare I use the Russian word, Russia as well.
Yeah.
So there's still a tradition of that.
Yeah, you can use the Russian word because if you're talking about Sweden in the same breath, because I think Swedes were the last nation to beat the Russians, and if my history recollection is accurate. What are there any particular foods or food processes in Sweden that you think could be exploited in Scotland?
Yes, I do actually. Lots, but we're running out of time, and then you're going to cut me off. So I'll be quick.
Yeah.
One of the things that they do beautifully is cold smoked sausage, cold smoked meats, and they also do a lot of different salads with different brassicas and kales. So winter salads is a thing they do well. If you go for a pizza or a sort of fast food in Sweden, they'll give you a winter salad. You know, you'll get your 5 a day, whether you want it or not, included. But these cold smoked sausages are fantastic. And
how does cold smoke work?
Well, personally,
Sounds like a contradiction in terms, an oxymoron.
I haven't done it, but quite a few of Busa's farmers' friends do their own, and of course they sell them in delicatessens. So, but you can do it's the same as when you cold smoke a fish. That you we do a lot of hot smoking here, but the cold smoking you need to have a longer lum. You need to have a place where you build your fire, and then the lum, usually the sort of metal chimney, allows the smoke to cool. So by the time it gets to food, it's cold smoke. So, and it's a preservative. So it's normally with brine. So there's a bit of a salting goes on and a brining, and then this cold smoking. And of course they use everything from wild boar to the venison and the moose, of course, and they use the local berries. So quite a lot of the Scots delicatessen go in for the chilies and the peppers and the sort of Mediterranean flavors. But again, there's lovely Nordic flavors. And in fact, Busa and I have been writing a book on this in lockdown, which we hope to have out by the summer, because I think we have got so much in common with the Nordic kitchen, and there are things that we have lost and they still have. They still have shillings. Now, shillings is another whole subject, but these are the summer farms where you took the animals to, and they would get sensational food and flavors from the wild flowers and make sensational products. And they still do that in Sweden and in Switzerland, in the Alps, and in Italy, but not in Sweden. We've lost, and in Scotland, we've lost our shillings. Yeah. So we have lots of food produce that ties in with tourism and ties in with security that we can use to make Scotland a fantastic food destination.
And tied into climate change too.
Definitely. Absolutely.
See, it seems to me there's three selling points right away, right off the top, without getting into any complications whatsoever. I can imagine there's a significant market for people who are concerned about climate change. Mm-hmm. There's a considerable market for people who are concerned about food sovereignty. Mm-hmm. And there's a big market, I suspect, for people who want nutritious food to give their families that doesn't cost the earth.
And I really do think that part of Scotland being independent is having a grip on our food system and this whole concept of a good food nation bill and even more, that it's our food tourism, it's our health. We really have a lot to celebrate, and we should really be focusing on the good stuff and recognizing it and valuing it, that food isn't just a fuel.
Do you think the Scottish government is doing enough?
I think there's room for improvement. I think there's always room for improvement. I think I'm going to be difficult here in my last minute. I think we get too embroiled in farm salmon when there's so many other more interesting things out there that are so much more ethical. We have got fantastic sheep and lamb that are underrated. We have 5 rare breeds in Scotland still alive and kicking, and heritage breeds with great flavors. Our Scottish pig is extinct, but we have 5 wonderful historic breeds of sheep, and those are things to be treasured, and they're not really treasured yet, and they should be.
Yeah, we need more information. Hopefully this will help, and your show's definitely helping. So please, everyone, head for Wendy Barrie's show, the Scottish Food Show. You won't regret it for a second. I'll say a big thank you right now. I'll come back and say something formally. Hopefully you can stick around for a few minutes after the show is finished. I just want to make a few concluding remarks, if I may, because for me this has been educational. As always. Big thank you to Wendy, and a big thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. I hope you've enjoyed this show. I certainly have. I've learned a lot. I expected to, but I've learned even more than I expected to. As ever, we have a formidable list of guests lined up. You've probably seen them on the strap across the bottom of the screen. We hope to be back next week with Alan Smith MP. And do look out, please, for my column in the Sunday National. You'll find it in the 7-day supplement. It's been a great pleasure to host this tonight. Thank you for joining us. And remember, it's been a great day for British democracy. It seems to me that the unionist argument on pensions could be summed up as follows. They're saying we cannot trust the United Kingdom to abide by its contract to pay pensioners, but we ought to trust the UK government with our total governance. Go figure, as they say. And along the way, we hear tonight that Prince Andrew has just given millions of pounds to somebody he insists he has never met. See, it could happen to you, that remarkable generosity. To all of you, thanks for joining us. Stay safe and take care, especially in this weather. You know, it's going to be a rough couple of 3 days, I suspect. Oh, and one last thing. I do hope you've supported the crowdfunder. If not, please do so. Watch the Scotonomics show that's coming up right now. But as soon as you watch that, please head for the crowdfunder and help out the good folks behind Indie Live. They really depend on your support. It's terribly, terribly important. So thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you next week at the same time. Take care. Look after yourselves.